Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this Friday. I'm Greg Swartz. I'm the big man half of the big man Dram. This would be the Dram. Dram has returned in earnest. And today we're discussing a very specific type of Drams, which is independent bottlings. And as a lot of you might know, that we've been working on a sort of a companion piece to the film about independent bottling. And one of the people that's been doing that with us is today's guest, which is my friend and collaborator, Mr. Guy Satchwell, who I would like to invite in now. So here we go. And let me unmute you, sir. Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Hey,
Greg, how are you doing?
Very well, thanks. How are you? Look at the difference in these drams between yours and mine.
I know. Isn't that extraordinary?
Yeah.
Well, this is a thing. This, by the way, the very fact that this is the way it is something I wouldn't mind talking about at one point, actually.
All right. I think that sounds great. I am drinking all today. I will be drinking independent bottlings. Makes sense. And I'm starting off with this, which is a taste of home.
Nice.
From the good people at the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. And
right,
you can see my whiskey is the color it is because it's in a refill X sherry butt. Its entire 12 years. And you?
Well, I'll show you what I'm on, and this will partly also. I don't know whether you'll pick up on the paleness of it, but and also so we can have a conversation about how to pronounce it.
Hold on a second. My screen. Okay. Yeah. Nice. Signature.
So that there's the big issue there, because is that a Kroisk or is that a Kreuzl?
Well, I believe, and this is that delightful mystery that is Gaelic, I believe it's a Thrusk, even though there's no TH in it whatsoever.
Right. Okay. I thought it was a Kreuzl. Good grief.
Well, according to our pal Roy Duff, it's a Thrusk.
Okay.
Roy, a few years ago, I'll admit to this. A few years, yeah. See, Keith Duncan's weighing in. It's a Thrusk. I like how Gaelic does not let the lack of that letter being in a word get in the way of it at all. Roy, years ago, Roy made a series of videos on YouTube about how to pronounce every distillery in Scotland. And even though I was pretty confident going in, I went and rewatched all of those beforehand. It's a never-ending challenge to wrap your head around Gaelic. Well, mine. If you want to take the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society's word for it, I'm drinking 30-108, which, if you want to use a our do you know that about the thing we made that was Nate made?
The thing? What do you mean?
I'm going to throw this because we're talking about independent bottling, and I'm going to throw this in the chat. Whoops, that's not it. Hold on a second. Nate, one of our co-producers, Nate Barlow, made this for us, which is a chart of every Scotch Malt Whiskey Society numbered distillery, so you can decode them instantly.
Oh, I've got that in my phone. I don't know whether it's Nate's one. It won't be Nate. There's various versions of it knocking around. I've got that. I mean, sadly, that is actually sort of really quite high up the list of documents in my download folder in my mobile phone. Yeah, I know. What can you say?
It's funny because every time I go to open that, my phone notifies me that I already have that page open. I never close it. So I put it in the chat, but I've also thrown it on the screen there. So but so anyway, this will be a Glenrothes that I'm drinking. Long way around telling you it's a Glenrothes.
A Glenrothes, very nice, very nice. Yes. I think one of the absolute nicest whiskies I've had at all, and certainly one of the nicest independent bottled whiskies I've had, was one of Ian Croucher's Glenrothes.
Well, I think it's one of those distilleries that really independent bottlers really show off what it can be if people let it be. That it's because it's got a rich. I mean, I've never had a whiskey that has a more cloying mouthfeel than this does, and that sounds bad, but it's actually it's delicious.
But see, while we're on to it, this is, just to sort of talk about straight in at the deep end. we're talking about independent bottlers, and this is an interesting thing that you're on the SMWS, because remember this thing that we had that turned out to be quite strange about the fact that the SMWS don't identify as an independent bottler, whereas that's very, very definitely what they are. I mean, what are they if they aren't an independent bottler?
I will tell you what they say, and I pitched to them the idea that they have transcended being an independent bottler. They felt like the club came first. They're still not a public retail outlet. So, and one of the things that they do, like Gordon and MacPhail does as well, is I think they buy new make. They don't buy matured casks. They only buy new make. So they're basically making the whiskey. They're not buying it made. Because that's what Gordon and MacPhail calls themselves, independent whiskey makers. Pardon?
Sorry, do they only solely buy new make now?
I don't know about SMWS. I know Gordon and MacPhail does. Gordon and MacPhail brings when a distillery agrees to sell Gordon and MacPhail a cask, Gordon and MacPhail shows up with the cask empty and fills it on the spot. And so they're independent whiskey makers is the term they use. But I mean, look, if push comes to shove, when it goes back to the root, it's all the same. That's what they are. They're independent. They're distillery-less bottlers. Although, as we could talk about in a few minutes, the better and bigger outlets now all seem to own their own distilleries, or are building them, or buying them.
Well, yes.
And okay, so a little background on we'll get to background on the independent bottling, but I want to give background on how this film is coming about. So what happened, basically in a nutshell, anyone who doesn't know this, again, Christopher Malloy says that generally speaking, that's how Compass Box does it too. Yeah, I agree. Compass Box does do that. They try to buy new make. I don't, I know that they're big into blending, and they may do blends of matured whiskey as well sometimes, but I don't know. But long story short, we were making our film. We shot a lot of footage at Gordon and MacPhail, a lot. They were very generous to us with their time and access to things. And then we didn't use as much of it as I really wanted to use, because I felt like independent bottlers, Gordon and MacPhail, large among them, really kind of led this birth of this movement of new creative energy and whiskey and experimentation and aggressive, whiskey for the 21st century. They were really at the cutting edge of it. And our editor and I were talking one day where I was like, there's so much footage here. There's a whole other movie here. And then there was this sort of ding, light bulb moment. And then I reached out to you, because we were like, we could take all this footage and use it and then supplement it with extra footage. And then supplementing with extra footage became probably more dominant than the footage that we have, because in case anyone doesn't know, over the course of the pandemic, we would get interviews set up, and Guy was in Scotland. I'm not. And for a long time, I couldn't go. And so Guy started doing interview after interview with all these independent bottlers. And then we decided, well, let's do this film together. So we're co-directing this film. And it's funny. Alphonse teases me. I hope he's not watching. He always teases me that he always writes hashtag still shooting, because we never really stop shooting stuff. We'll start editing stuff, but it never really ends. And we felt like it would make a good companion piece. This is, you might recognize Mr. Satchwell. This is all the new interviews.
It's 7 terabytes of material, something like that.
In addition to this stuff from the original shoot too, which is probably another 5 or 6. So, we're making a film that you'd be able to watch it on its own and get what it is. It's not in any way tied into the other film, but stylistically, compositionally, creatively, the idea is that it's a kind of a companion piece about these, Billy Walker in the film. That I assume people who are watching this will have seen our film. That Billy Walker always says that, there was a lot of, the industry owed a debt to the independent bottlers, that they were doing a lot of things when there weren't a lot of single malts out there. And so we're kind of trying to tell that story. I have a question I'm going to let you ask. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying, but the thing is do you not think that one of the interesting things about that is that when we started, we thought we had an idea. We thought we had an idea what it was. We thought we knew what the independent bottling scene was. And the more and more and more we delved into these interviews, the more and more it became clear that actually we really didn't, because there's just so many different models. You keep talking to new people and going, right, that's a different way of doing it.
Yeah.
We've been surprised all the way through by that.
Absolutely. there's no kind of set model on how to do. I mean, there's a few. Look, I'm sure Cadenhead and Gordon and MacPhail kind of operate similarly. I'm sure Signatory and Adelphi operate fairly similarly. But God, nowadays you could, if you have the right connections, you could have a laptop and Excel and become an independent bottler if you have the right, if you know the right places to do stuff.
But that brings us back to a conversation that you and I only had the other night, which is that thing about, could you start out? Could you just launch yourself as an independent bottler just now? Could you start out assuming you've got a laptop? And the conclusion was actually probably not. You can't, because you just can't start. You have to have a foot in. It appears all the people we've spoken to all had a foot in the industry one way or the other.
Sure, but you theoretically could. I mean, there's no legal barrier stopping you. You don't have to buy equipment. A lot of the bottlers, the smaller ones, just own a warehouse or just rent a warehouse. But the relationships is what it's all about, and I think that's key and always going to be key. Russell Patton asks, how independent are these indie bottlers? I mean, they're all very independent. If anything, they're becoming big. Some of them are becoming quite big players. Elixir bought Tormore, is building Port Natruan. Gordon MacPhail owns Ben Romick. They're building another distillery right now. Douglas Lang is building a distillery. Hunter Lang owns Ardnahoe. This is not a wee farmer, in a bothy on a hill somewhere. These guys. Some of them are big players, but they're to the best of my knowledge, I don't know any of the giant multinationals that have any independent bottling. I mean, Glenmorangie used to own the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, but they don't anymore.
They are. I think they are all independent. They just vary in size. So some of them are still small. There are some armchair bottlers left, but even some of the guys that were armchair bottlers, like Ian Croucher, is now into Dalriata. So but there are still some one-man bands or two-man bands and such like. But they all seem to be independent, even if you quite rightly say, even as if they've actually become bloody massive in a way. Building distilleries is no small investment. You don't do that with change in your back pocket. That's a big commitment. And like you say, the idea of Tormore, actually building a distillery on Islay and buying a distillery in Speyside pretty at the same time, and yet still be an independent. That's extraordinary that they can do that without having a corporate behind them. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And shows how healthy everything is.
Now the trick though will be, they have to keep the spirit coming. What would happen here? This is an example. I have one here with me. This is Ralphie's independent bottling from last year, but this is a Kalila. Yeah, it takes an hour to read a Ralphie label, but you just have to trust me. It says somewhere on here, it does say Kalila. There it is, the very top line right there. That's still Kalila. Kalila, I swear, is 15-20% of all the independent bottlings appear to come from Kalila. So what happens if Diageo cuts off that route? To market. That's going to be that's the big challenge, I think, for independent.
Sorry, what are you saying? You're saying you think that 20% of independent bottlings of whiskey are Kalilas?
I made the number up, but a huge amount.
Nonetheless, it's weird. The only reason I'm kind of surprised in a way is because I don't think I've ever owned an independent bottling of a Kalila. And now I think about it, I haven't stumbled across it, but then I've not been looking.
Well, here's the thing, and I'll tell you, in my opinion, if these days, if an independent bottling comes out and it says it's an Islay whiskey, before I even know where it comes from, I just assume it's a Kalila or it's $400. Those are the only two options. I do have a Lafroig independent bottling, and I have a couple of Bruichladdich independent bottlings. I don't have any Lagavulin. I don't think they've ever sold Lagavulin casks. I don't have any Ardbeg. So if it's Christopher Malloy said I'd argue that virtually all of the IB mystery malts are Kalila. Anytime it's a peated whiskey, if it's an independent bottling, my brain and my palate is gonna look for a Kalila first.
Yeah, I think. The thing is, the thing for me that sort of expresses an ignorance on my part, an ignorance of Islay malts, which is that I'm not the world's biggest Islay drinker, so I tend to not know that because I don't go looking for it because I rarely buy an Islay malt, whether it's a distillery bottling or an independent. So it's not something I've really focused on. It's quite an interesting point.
Well, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but if I can explain for a second the reason there's so much Kalila in the market, I will. And I think a lot of people who watch this probably know this, but Kalila is actually the biggest distillery on Isla. It produces the most whiskey by a wide margin of any distillery on Isla, and it's the one most people have never heard of because very little of it is sold as Kalila. A ton of it, the overwhelming majority of it, is sold as Johnny Walker Black. It's the main whiskey that's in Johnny Walker Black. So Kalila is a factory, and it can just pump out whiskey at a huge volume. So what Diageo does, and I think before Diageo existed, they also did this, is rather than dial up or down production levels, they just keep it running at a set level. And if they have lesser needs, then they make those casks available. If they have increased needs, they make fewer casks available. And there's a certain threshold, and they want a cushion. So that cushion is what they sell off. And because they produce so much whiskey, that cushion is sizable. That cushion is probably bigger than Kilhoman, the output. And I think they've just discovered it's a better business model than trying to. I always picture a guy like with some sort of steampunk lever trying to sort of slow down a distillery, and it's better to not do it.
But that in itself, that in itself sort of focuses back on the whole argument about independent bottlers and where they get their stock from. Because, do you know what I mean? There's an argument, isn't there, that their own, the popular argument, the independent bottlers are getting what's left over. You sort of partly reinforce that. If you're looking to bottle an Isla, then Kalila's where you get it, because it is kind of almost leftovers in a way, which is weird.
And it's arguably the most consistent thing on Isla. Like because there's so little, it's just output. Nothing changes in it. They're not doing any experiments with it for the overwhelming majority of it. It is what it is, and you can, it's going to be a guaranteed. There's an expectation of consistency. Christopher Malloy asked that he's heard that a lot of unpeated parts of Johnny Walker Black. I don't think that's true, because Diageo is turning the 4 main Johnny Walker distilleries into Johnny Walker visitor centers now, including on Isla. I've actually seen the Johnny Walker statues now at Kalila, and I can't remember the other 3, but there are 4 distilleries that are now featured Johnny Walker destinations, and then also the 5th would be that one on Edinburgh on Princess Street. The new Johnny Walker Experience, whatever it's called. So maybe they do. They may make unpeated malts at Kalila. I really don't know. I've been there. But so, we had a question that flew by here, and I wanted to put it back. Keith Duncan said, what makes an independent bottler an independent bottler? I mean, they don't own distilleries. They bottle whiskey. It's a unique thing. There's not, I've struggled since Guy and I have been working on this film, I've struggled for a really good metaphor for people who don't know anything. And the closest I've come, and this isn't perfect, but the closest I've come is aftermarket tuners in the car world. There are trusted partners like AMG. I know Mercedes-Benz now owns AMG, but they didn't used to. But yet there were AMG lines of Mercedes, and they trusted them to customize them. Here in the US, there's Saleen Mustangs, there's Shelby Mustangs, and Ford lets them keep the Mustang brand on there, but then they do all this customization and stuff on their own. And I think some of the distilleries have really good relationships with places like Gordon and MacPhail. They let them keep their name on it as well. This would be here, perfect example here. This is a Gordon and MacPhail Scapa. So Scapa trusts Gordon and MacPhail to, respect their brand, treat it well, not embarrass them, not put garbage in a bottle, and vice versa. And then the other thing is that this kind of grew out of the whole grocery culture. Johnny Walker was a grocer. Johnny Walker has never been a distillery. There is no Johnny Walker distillery. There's just distilleries where that spirit comes from. And the grocers, because they were tea blenders, used to blend tea. And then when they would they were buying spirit from 5 different farmers, all of those farmers would have different spirit. And so they discovered that rather than just trying to teach all the farmers how to make more consistent product, they would blend them and blend out the rough patches, and then they started giving them nicknames. And they say that's where the idea of expressions came from. That whiskeys would have different nicknames based on the type of place it came from or the style it was made in and stuff like that. And so it all grew out of that. Tommy Dewar's, the Dewars were grocers. Johnny Walker's a grocer. Gordon and MacPhail still is a grocer. There is a Gordon and MacPhail grocery store in Elgin to this day, and in the back room of it is the coolest whiskey shop you'll ever set foot in.
I think we should go back to that, by the way. I think we should go back to high street grocers that sell whiskey. Be a lovely way to go, wouldn't it? Get your fruit and veg in a wee brown bag and an unmarked bottle. It'd be nice,
Do you know there's a liquor store in downtown Los Angeles in Boyle Heights called Ramirez Liquor? And Ramirez Liquor for the longest time had a food truck that they would let park outside, and it would sell burgers, really good burgers. And then they came up with this idea. They literally punched a hole in the wall of the building and parked the truck there permanently and made it like a counter. So now you can go there. It's a big liquor store. When you shop, you go order a burger, and then you go shop, and then over the PA system, they announce, Guy, your burger's ready. And then you go, and then there's like 4 stools made out of old kegs, and you sit down and you eat your burger while you're buying whiskey.
But I was just thinking, going back to what you were saying about the overspill of whiskies that would have gone to blending. That's another thing that's so interesting, I think, about independent bottlers, is because you'll get stuff which there are no distillery bottlings, and it only exists with an independent label. It's only the independent bottlers that will bottle this stuff, and it's your only way to see that. And I just realized, for example, well, Keith will correct me, but what I've been calling incorrectly a Kreuzl. I mean, that's a whiskey essentially for blending, isn't it? The only time that I don't think there are any distillery bottlings, are there? I don't think so.
I've never seen an official bottling of a Thrusk. Never.
Right, and that goes to J&B. Now that goes to J&B, and the weird thing is, and this is interesting, whether it's a connection to Andrew Symington, but I've also got another of Andrew's signatories. Now the Strathmill, if I'm not mistaken, is another one which is predominantly a component of J&B, isn't it?
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, and I'm drinking the Glenrothes has always been one of the main ingredients of Famous Grouse. and when Edrington sold off Glenrothes, they did a deal with, I can't remember who bought it, when they did a deal with the new buyers to keep supplying for Famous Grouse, which if you were buying it, couldn't you imagine saying no to that deal? It's like, you mean I'm going to have like this gigantic customer the day I take over? Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I had a long conversation when we were shooting, and I always forget, since you were mixing sound on the shoot, you probably hear everything. Sound mixers hear everything. Jim and I had a long conversation while we were shooting. He was talking about blending, and he was talking about being in Glasgow and learning to blend. And he said one of the things that people forget about nowadays, where everything's a single malt, is that a lot of these older brands weren't ever even designed to be a single malt.
Exactly.
And they generally don't make for a great single malt because they've had all the rough edges sanded off of them. They're very mild and because and Rachel Barry told us that was always the challenge that Glen Glasso has been in and out of mothballs so many times, is because it's such a unique spirit that no blenders wanted it because they couldn't replace it. There was no equivalent to it. It was just too weird.
Right. So it was dangerous as an element because it's unreplaceable. Yeah. Nothing wrong with the Glen Glasso. Gosh.
No, absolutely not. So it's I love the world of independent bottling. And I have so many of them. I have 4 sitting here next to me because I had to, and it's funny, I'm going to admit the 4 I picked are based on a little bit on what was like literally I could reach. It's just because I would have had I have a Bunnahabhain from Gordon MacPhail that it's really good, but it's in the back and it's behind like 6 other bottles, and I was just too lazy.
But one thing, because I've got 3 here beside me, and you've just seen 2 of them. But this is the thing, we've had a conversation about this. One of the fascinating things I think about independent bottlers is how you'll get some independent bottlers who their portfolio is ever changing and very, very mixed, and some people who have almost not a core range, but they have their own style. And I'm a huge fan of Signatory, Andrew Symington stuff. But look at what do you think is common about these 3 whiskies, right? And the third one I've got here, which is a Mortlach, they're all pale. Now, I think that Andrew Symington pretty much seems to, with obvious exceptions, only bottle pale whiskies. Everything he bottles is pretty much straw-coloured.
other than, of course, Edredauer, which is probably the darkest whiskey, the root beer
Yes,
colored whiskey.
but
Yeah,
that's Edward Dower.
that's where he puts.
This
That's where every sherry cask they get. That's where it goes.
exactly. Yeah, and then this the signatory stuff. I just think, and the unchilled filtered range, it also seems well, not all, but on the whole, every time I get one, they're almost the same color, these three whiskies, and they're three beautiful whiskies. And interestingly, that house style does come through that. So the Mortlach, which is lovely, but it's no worse for this, but this, as lovely as it is, it kind of lacks that massive meatiness that distillery bottlings of Mortlach usually have. That it's almost like a beef burger in whiskey form, and that doesn't have it.
Yeah.
It's none the worse for it. It's absolutely lovely. It's more like pudding, that one, but yeah, I just think it's interesting that that's a Mortlach that's completely different. It's more like Andrew's house style, if you will, and that's one of the
Absolutely.
reasons.
And Alistair Walker. So one of the people who's going to be featured in this film is Alistair Walker, who's Billy Walker's son and has Infrequent Flyers as his bottling line. And he and I were on a panel together. Oh, there you go. And he talked about how if he could take two of his whiskeys and everything about them can be identical, including the source, except the cask is different. The darker one will always sell faster than the lighter one, because people equate it with age. They think, oh, this is so old. It's the color of leather. But it's not. Some of the ex-bourbon casks are phenomenal. I mean, this Scapa great, and look at it, it's pale as straw.
Yeah. But do you not think that there is, people are becoming more educated, and people are so much, well, potentially more into independent bottlers, and do get their favourites. So Signatory is a favourite of mine, which means I've got a lot of pale whiskies in my cabinet because I've always got Andrew stuff, and as beautiful as that is, and it's absolutely lovely, but I'm surprised at the moment how few whiskies I've got in the cabinet that are that colour. But yes, you're right. If you saw that on a shelf, you would want to buy it because it's a beautiful colour. That's a lovely, lovely whiskey, by the way. That's absolutely gorgeous. I'll be having one of those in a moment.
Well, Christopher Malloy said that's, the refill casks really let the character shine. Yeah, totally agree. And I think you're going to see more and more of that because first fill casks are getting absolutely outrageously priced. And I think that's a big reason that some of these distilleries want to be independent bottlers want to have distilleries. They can use the casks. They can get the refill casks from their own distillery. They don't have to go source wood. So many, not all, but so many of the independent bottlers won't add caramel nowadays because it's in the whiskey nerd world. It's become pretty much anathema. And so, we've got a couple of good questions coming in. Keith Duncan's looking for career advice. Is now a good time to start an independent bottler business? I know you're not asking, Keith, because you're going to do it just a curiosity, but I will say this: in my opinion, the only way I would do it right now is if I knew I had a 10-year supply of spirit coming in, because I think that's what's getting hard. You're going to get outbid by other independent bottlers, and nowadays there's so many that are that are coming on board. The most successful ones are the ones that have really good connections, and therefore if you have a distillery, great. But it's funny. This is kind of about that and Mark Pruitt's question, which I'm going to throw up here. As the demand for whiskey continues to grow, how will IBs be impacted by this? They can't scale, and the product will vary by what is made available. Will it always be a niche? If so, how do IBs stay alive in this environment? Well, I think
by buying a distillery.
Yeah, by building a distillery or buying one. Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is they become, some of them, Single Cask Nation, who are good friends of ours. That's one of my bottles you can see I have here. These guys have become good friends of ours. I know them and I know their business. And
who's that on the label, Greg?
That's you. They have they have become, to me, the Single Cask Nation guys are like concierges. They're the nation, as Jason calls them. The nation trusts them, and therefore they'll follow them, and they'll do a new thing. They just released a brandy, and they discovered it. They thought it was amazing, so they decided to release it because they know that their fans and their followers will trust them, myself included. But it's funny. In a very, very confident statement, someone at Gordon MacPhail said to me that the growth of new independent bottlers is such that's created this demand for wood, and if that continues, they're going to have some issues to deal with at Gordon MacPhail in about 75 years, because Gordon MacPhail has just an absolute cornucopia of whiskeys, and I'll be honest with you, I would not get into it right now. I've been told by people that technology has made it quite easy, but at the same time, a lot of people, I think it was actually Ian Croucher, said plenty of times you don't even get a chance to try the cask before you buy it. You have to trust the broker who's selling it to you. They'll give you all the information: 58.9% ABV, ex bourbon, 12 years, this, but you have to bid on it without even trying it. And then what I've been told, though, happens is if you get something and you don't like it, then there's a lot of swapsies between the independent bottlers that are friends with each other, that someone else might have use for this and you don't, or whatever, or they'll re-rack it.
But going back to Mark's question, I'm obviously teaching anyone to suck eggs. Mark knows. But one line that I would be very, very surprised if it doesn't make the film, Greg. I'm sure you're going to include it. But remember that we interviewed Neil Matheson from Mossburn. And a line what Neil said to me in answer to a question, which I then ended up firing back to everybody who subsequently interviewed, was Neil Matheson said, any independent bottler that does not currently own or isn't planning to buy or build a distillery is finished. That's pretty bold.
Yeah. But I wonder if he's capable of thinking on a granular level, like a Single Cask Nation, where these are, Single Cask Nation is a small, nimble company that is dealing with 2-3 casks at a time. And I realize a guy like that at Mossburn isn't going to think in those kind of terms, that they can sort of scurry around beneath that kind of fray. I don't know.
I don't know, because the guys, that's the one that Ian Crouch is a classic example. I mean, he was what the second interview I did, I think. And Ian was your classic one-man armchair bottler when I interviewed him right at the beginning of this process. And now, I don't know about you, I feel we need to interview him again because he's in the Dalriata now. The whole, his model has now changed going forward. He's one of the guys who's got in there and, let's start having whiskey, making whiskey, trading whiskey.
Yeah. And he's really been world beating, for these last few years. I mean, he's just kicking ass all over the place. And North Star Spirits has just been, the whiskeys are great. They sell out everywhere. They're, and they clearly are just going from win to win right now. I actually just spoke to him 2 days ago, and he's eager to be interviewed again if we want.
One thing about it, remember the conversation we had about something I started asking people, which is the whole independent bottler scene. I've never come across any industry where everybody seems to like each other so much. Everybody's they're people who are actually directly competing with each other are helping each other out in times of need. But do you remember we had this conversation about two people that always shine out, that always come up in conversation, is Ian Croucher and Alex Bruce, who everybody loves Ian and Alex. Always. You have that conversation with people like, isn't the independent bottling scene full of lovely people? Oh, well, you've got people like Ian and Alex. They always come up straight away.
And they're very different. It's so funny because they're very different from each other. But and I mean, I love Adelphi. And it's funny because Adelphi is the first example I can think of that's a perfect example where Adelphi was already an established independent bottling. It's been established before Alex owned it, and then created a distillery. And now the distillery has gone right into being one of the most respected distilleries out there. And I mean, they didn't mess around. There wasn't. Look, I mean, Gordon and MacPhail and Ben Romick is kind of, but Gordon and MacPhail didn't build Ben Romick; they bought it. They bought it out of mothballs, but they bought it. It was already existent, and so now they're building their own distillery as well, but it's an interesting time. It's funny. We've got a lot of questions and comments and stuff.
I'm not seeing the questions, by the way. Interestingly, I think it's because I'm not signed in or something.
Well, maybe. Even though people are better educated, they still stick to color, especially in the U.S. I do hope. Well, it's funny, Fiona. In the U.S., there is no color. That's the thing. I mean, American whiskey, whiskeys you can buy here are colored, but American bourbon has no color. There's no need to. It's all virgin wood. It's going to get colored in a week. It just has never become part of the culture here. I don't honestly know if it's illegal to add color in the U.S. to bourbon. I don't know. I just know that the vast majority of them, at least all the ones I know, don't. Because I just think that with virgin wood, you're going to get such a wood impact right away that is, you're going to not need it. But yeah, I mean, people do equate the darker whiskeys with the older ones. That's for sure. Here, Mark Pruitt follow-up question here. That was my point. It's in the interest of most distillers to sell every drop they make in some way. SCN is doing a great job of monetizing and selling these bottles. Bigger distillers have noticed. And there's a guy who's very briefly in our film. His name is Kenneth Campbell. He's a guy who works at the Lockfine Whiskey Shop in Inverary. And he said to us, the stakes of doing experiments as an independent bottler are so much lower than the stakes of, and I'll give you an example that he gave me. He said, look, we've been doing, this was 4 years ago, we did this interview. He said, we've been doing experiments with rum cask finishes for a decade. And he said, now you have Balvenie doing it and Glenlivet doing it. But he said, when Balvenie does it, or certainly Glenlivet, is one of the 2 or 3 biggest brands on earth. When Glenlivet does it, they're talking about 10,000, or thousands of casks. I'm not going to guess how many casks they make of that Caribbean, but thousands of casks. Whereas the guys at the Inverary Whiskey Shop can do it with a cask.
Yeah.
And if it's shit, they'll just put it in a different cask and try to undo it. They'll just you sort of keep adding on to it until eventually somewhere it clicks. I don't know if that works.
That's a fair point. God.
Well, I asked him, that guy that day, I asked him, do you think that the industry uses independent bottlers as a research and development arm, sort of? And he said, well, they certainly pay attention more than they would ever let on. They certainly are aware. And if that shop releases a Balvenie, not that you can get an independent bottling of Balvenie, which we can talk about, but if they did that, Balvenie would try it and say, oh, this really works. So there's no risk to them to do it.
Although, of course, there's an argument that says these days there's virtually no risk in anything you do, really, is there? Because whatever you do, you're going to sell whiskey just now. That's this bizarre time we're in.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's I'm like wondering what's going to be the next Springbank, where it's just, I have an unopened bottle of, I hate the fact that I let the industry impact me like this, but I have an unopened bottle of Springbank 10-year-old. Nothing crazy rare. It's just a regular standard Springbank 10. And I think I probably paid $50 for it. And then I saw it just 2 days ago or 3 days ago at the liquor store. The same thing was $110, like a year later at the same store I bought it in. I was like, so now I don't want to open it. That's how it's impacted me. Now I'm like, well, maybe I should just sit on this for a while. But my wife always teases me. She's like, you act like you're going to get around to selling it. You're not.
Oh, I know. I mean, I've got a there's a Bowmore Andrew Simpson edition 20-year-old over there, and I keep looking at it, and I know it's going up in value. It's worth 3 times what I paid for it, but I know that bottle is not getting out of this house alive, no matter what I think and what I say. Somehow or other, sooner or later, I'm going to go, nah, you're done. It's going to be opened. I mean, the fact that it's out and open and staring at me in the face is telling, isn't it?
My Brad and I. Brad, who was the cinematographer on the film, he and I are good friends, and he and I have the same post-mortem plans that we've told each other. When I die, I want my wife or whoever outlives me to have a giant party, and all of my friends get to drink all of my whiskey, but none of it stays behind. Okay, so yeah, let's see here. We have Christopher Malloy said, yeah, whiskey geeks drive the industry. Yeah, either that or partner up with the Kardashian. Harriet Watt, which is probably the world's most respected distilling school, actually has marketing classes in like celebrity marketing of spirits and drinks and stuff now. It's insane. It's absolutely insane.
Which begs the question: is there such a thing as a Kardashian whiskey? Because if there isn't, there probably will be by the end of next week.
It'll be a tequila. It'll be a tequila. Whiskey's too. It takes patience and dedication. Tequila, you just throw your name on it. So Fiona Beasley said, "Yeah, my point being that the vast majority of people in the U.S., because of the virgin wood, expect whiskey to be dark." Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, although like Jack Daniels is certainly not dark, or like the big, Jim Beam, but.
And Fiona's just answered that question. It is illegal to put color into bourbon, so she's answered that question for us. Yeah.
Let's see here. I have no idea how you guys have bottles that you haven't opened. I clearly have zero self-control.
Keith, I know, Keith. Honestly, I have that one bottle. I have that one Bamor. That's it. I mean, normally, no, a bottle's got hours to live once it comes into the house in terms of being open. So yes, I'm with you, Keith, totally.
I open the vast majority of my bottles, but I do have probably 10 or 12 that aren't open. My most precious thing is open, actually. My most precious whiskey is the cask sample that Jim gave me of the Diana cask. So that's in the 200 ml bottle that you were there. We tasted it that day.
Yeah.
I still have that. Trevor. Mark Pruitt says that 818 Tequila is a Kardashian brand. Well, there you go.
What can you say?
There's a big push in tequila, celebrity tequila brands now, and I've never had a single one of them. And I drink mezcal. I don't really drink tequila, but I do drink mezcal sometimes. But one of the things though I wanted to talk about, Fiona Beasley said she's got a wardrobe full and she's selling some via auction. Yeah, that's what my wife teases me about. That she's like, you don't have and she's not wrong. My wife is 100% right. I don't have the sort of I don't know, time or focus or to do it. But one thing I wanted to talk about today, because I find it interesting, is teaspooning.
Okay, yeah.
So teaspooning, in case anyone doesn't know, is a distillery that doesn't sell their bottles or their casks for independent bottling or any other purpose. They claim, whether they actually do it is irrelevant, but they will claim that they have put a teaspoon, that's the name, of a different whiskey in it, therefore compromising it, and it's no longer a single cask. The example would be Balvenie does not sell Balvenie casks for bottlings. But if you put a teaspoon of Glenfiddich, because they own that would vice versa, then it's no longer that, and then they'll sell that, and you can find ones of those, and they all have names for them too. I can never remember Hepburn, one of them. I should have thought of some ahead of time, but they'll do it because then they can do it without having to compromise. The other thing that distilleries will do, like this bottling, is an undisclosed distillery, which is generally it doesn't have any kind of quality indicator. What it is they feel that this is too far away from their core brand, or it's just something they tried or something different, not better or worse, different. And so they don't want their name affiliated with it, or it's been sold and resold, and there's no longer kind of a clearance to use the brand. I mean, the thing to me that's amazing about some of the stuff Gordon MacPhail gets to do, they don't just say Scapa; they're using Scapa branding, like that's the Scapa font.
Yeah. That's yeah.
If you bought an official bottling of Scapa, that would look like this.
The label is like that. Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing, of course, is you've got the disguised name.
Yeah,
the name that is obviously. Well, here's a great example of that. Hang on. Right. So, decode. Can you work out where that's from? I mean, why bother? Yeah. I mean, you would have thought that would just piss them off.
Well, who was the other one that someone released a whiskey called Laughing Frog? It was an Isla whiskey called Laughing Frog?
No. What was that?
I can't. I don't remember who released it, but there was a whiskey called Laughing Frog, which was clearly a Lefroy. So yeah, Christopher Malloy asked a really good question. Does the added teaspoon have to be the same age as the cask? It has to be or older. You can only age state the young. You can only. I've never really given that much thought, but you can only age state the youngest whiskey that's in it. And it's funny though. They say that when Billy Walker was still running Glendronach, and they were just really kind of coming into their own, everybody said that they were actually underage releasing their whiskey, meaning like the 18 was probably more like 25, but there wasn't quite enough to do it at 25, so they do it at 18. But the overwhelming majority was older, and they didn't care because it was just considered to be so freaking delicious that it just built the reputation, and they were happy to lose the. Actually, people have said that about Victoriana, the Glen Scotia Victoriana, that it's a non-age stated whiskey, but that all of the whiskeys that are in it are actually very old. They just want flexibility to try to maintain it.
I've warned you before, by the way, about using the word Glendronach without warning me, because I'm now going to have to go for a lie down.
I don't have any Glendronach right now. Oh, I do. I do.
I don't either.
I have a SMWS bottle of Glendronach.
Oh, fabulous stuff.
Oh, here you go. Mark Pruitt knew it. It was single cask nation, Laughing Frog, 28-year-old.
Which comes back to, again, this is the thing we were talking about the other night, coming back to the question somebody asked earlier about this whole thing about could you start off being an independent bottler and a one-man band. And you and I were talking about this other night about Alistair Walker. And Alistair Walker is a one-man band, armchair, independent bottler who's relatively new in the game. But as you quite right, but his dad, his dad is his dad. He didn't just start out blind. He didn't just start out, coming out the embryo as an independent bottler. If that's your dad, you to be fair, I'd not to belittle what he does at all, because he bottles fabulous whiskey, and here's a case in point. But when Billy Walker's your old man, then you've got good contacts. That's a good start, isn't it?
People return your phone calls. Yeah.
People return your phone calls. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's funny because Alistair Walker said to me the one time we spoke was he was pleasantly surprised at the nice things that Billy says in our film about independent bottling, because usually when he talks about independent bottlers, there's a lot of four-letter words involved.
Yeah.
But I think you can also respect it, without liking it, the sort of stealing your thunder or something. So Christopher Malloy said Glenmorangie says there's 35-year-old malt in Signet. I've heard that too, yeah. And that's the other thing about what's the Big Pete. Douglas Lang's Big Pete. It includes Port Ellen, because Douglas Lang is a great independent bottler, and they're in a uniquely cool position where let's call it, I don't know, I wasn't there. This was 30 years ago. Let's say it's either foresight or dumb luck or a little mix of both. They bought a ton of Port Ellen casks and right before Port Ellen closed. So they own a ton of it, and it's become like, hen's teeth. And all Big Pete always lists every distillery that goes into Big Pete, and Port Ellen's always one of them. But you have to wonder, is there a teaspoon of Port Ellen in there? Because why would you put it into a blend if you can sell it? If you have a 30-year-old cask of Port Ellen, you could sell it and buy a house.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's funny. I'm not going to become an independent bottler anytime soon, anyway. But I will tell you that.
But you kind of have been already.
Well, we have. I mean, we're just collaborators. We're just doing this sort of selection, and that's the easy part. We're doing the easy part of it. But I own a few casks of whiskey, and I've bought over the last few years. And my intention when they mature and when I want to do that is to find an independent bottler to partner with. And because a lot of what people will do is they'll do a deal with a bottler, or they'll sell it to some other independent bottler and then their deal is you pay me this much money and I get to keep 10 bottles, and they sell the other 270 bottles or whatever. But I would rather partner with someone and sort of see it through, just because I'm curious, and I don't think it would hurt the investment. And at this point, I'm a partner in 3 casks, so we'll see. I mean, there's another one maybe on the horizon. So but only one of them has matured into whiskey at this point. That's the one that I made that when I worked at the Glasgow distillery, that when
Oh yes.
I followed the match through. So that's now whiskey. And when we go to Scotland in June for the Isla tour, I'm getting a cask sample while I'm there. So if I see you, I'll give you some.
You'll see me.
Well, hey, speaking of which, if there's anybody other than Russell and Keith watching who are in Scotland, I'm coming into Scotland a few days before our tour, and I'm going to stay a few days after our tour. And one of the reasons is I want to get some shots of whiskey fans drinking independent bottlings. So, get in touch with me, and we'll work out a time to meet up once in Glendale. I'm in LA too long. Once in Glasgow, once in Edinburgh. I was going to say Glendale, which is the next town over from me here, but I'm not going to do it in Glendale.
Yeah, that needs set up, doesn't it? Yeah. But yeah, Keith, you're going to end up in the movie.
Oh yeah, Keith is going to be in it for sure. Keith's going to be on the poster like this.
Keith's going to be on the poster.
Gosh, yeah, God, I love Scapa. It's funny, I don't own any official bottlings of Scapa. I've only ever seen one or two, but Skirin I know is one. But I absolutely love this whiskey. I drank this at Sandwich.
Have you been?
No,
to
I've never been to Orkney.
God, really? I mean, Scapa, that really is a distillery right on the edge. You know what I mean? It only needs the very, very, very slightest of a minor earth tremor, and that distillery is going to fall into the water. It really is. It's just right on the beach. It's really windswept. It's just right on the sea. And, clearly it's in the whiskey. It's lovely.
What is the blend that Scapa's in? Is it Ballantine's? I think it is.
Oh, I don't know.
One of the big blends has a ton of Scapa in it. And that's why, because Scapa didn't used to be owned by, I think it's Turnover Card, and it is now, and I think that's why, because I think it's one of the big blends or ingredients in Ballantine's. You know what? I was going to open up that Ralphie Kalila, but it's early in the day. I'm going to have another one of these. But we're actually short on time. This flew by, man. A lot of great chat and a lot of really good questions today. I'm really loving it, and I love talking about this, and I love I'm really digging what we're going to do with this film, and I hope it finds an audience. I know that it's not going to ever have the broad audience that the other film has, because people don't know what it is. People don't. They hear independent bottling. Like, what the hell is that? But we're going to teach them.
Yeah, well, that's the fascinating thing, and that comes back to that whole thing about what's one question that everybody, I'm sure you've done it with your guys, but everybody I've spoken to, there's always a leading question at the beginning, which is, what the hell's the point in an independent bottler? And it's amazing. Nobody doesn't react to that. It's a fiery question. What's the point of an independent bottler? And they're off. Everybody's off. There really is a point to independent bottlers. It would be a much, much weaker scene without them. There's no question about that.
Absolutely. And you would never know all these brands. I'm a big fan of Dalyuen. Keith, I've turned Keith Duncan onto Dalyuen as well, and I'm a big fan of it. I love it. I have probably 4 bottles of it. I'll be honest with you, I don't think I have ever had an official bottling of Dalyuen. I've only had independent bottlings of it, and I love them. And I would have never known it had I not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it goes back to this the thing I keep mispronouncing, the Kreuzl. What is it again? What's the correct pronunciation?
Othrusk.
Othrusk. Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean,
like AWE and Thrusk, like THRUSK.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, don't blame me, man. I'm just the messenger.
No, absolutely. No, thanks to Keith for keeping us right.
Thrusk and Altavania are the ones that people are Altavane. I don't even know. And I've actually heard 2 different Scots argue about whether it's Altavane or Altavania.
Okay. Oh, yeah. No, I think it's absolutely fascinating, because I think certainly half of everything that's in my cabinet, I'm looking at it at the moment is independent bottlings. And isn't that fascinating?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because here we'll do one more question here. Mark Pruitt says, I wonder out loud if the destiny of craft distillers and independent bottlers are somehow becoming intertwined.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think so for sure. Okay. Christopher Malloy corrected me because I have had this. Wasn't there a Game of Thrones Daluin? Yes, there is. I have it, and yes, that is an official bottling. That's just a special bottling or something. It's funny when Game of Thrones finale was so universally banned. The one liquor store here sold. All of a sudden, they announced that every one of the Game of Thrones whiskeys that they had released was $19. So Alphonse and I went and bought a veritable shit ton of these. I still have like 6 left. I mean, they were like $80 one day and they were $19 the next day. So we just went and bought a ton.
Am I the only person that just couldn't watch that, by the way?
Well, I mean, people just felt like the finale just really, or the whole last season, I think, just fell apart. And so it really kind of probably killed the excitement of that bottling, of the whole line that, Diageo probably paid a lot of money for that, and I think it really crushed the release. But I do have a Daluin, and so that would be an official bottling. It feels like an independent bottling because it's not like a normal release or core range. I don't even know if there is a Daluin core range.
No, not as far as I'm aware. I was reaching for Charlie's book there to find out. I'll do it later.
Yeah, I was looking for. I don't have it here. Because David Stirk, I asked him to join us today. His new book about independent whiskey is out.
And, I was just about to say, let's mention that. Yeah,
it's in my living room, or I would have shown it on screen. But it's it's called Independent Scotch, right? And it's by David Stirk, and it's a great book. I've only just got tucked into it because I just came 2 days ago. And it's funny. Every time I look around, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that book. My whiskey book collection grows faster than I can consume it. And I'm reading Nicholas Morgan's book on Johnny Walker right now, on the history of Johnny Walker, which is interesting because Johnny Walker is at once both the most officially branded whiskey in Scotland, and it's sort of the birth of independent bottling at the same time. It's a weird niche,
Mm-hmm. David's book's a belter, though. Actually, I mean, like you, I've only just started, but I think it looks very, very readable. It's very good. I'm almost scared that people will read it and feel no need to watch the film.
Well, he's in the film. There you go. That's how you.
He's in the film.
Go on that. He's in the film.
Yeah, I think he's going to be in the film twice. I think we're going to have to go back and have to see him again. Actually,
excellent. Well, it is just coming up on 2 my time, 10 your time. So we should wrap this up, man. But this was fun. We should do this more often.
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. So what have you got on tomorrow? What's your day tomorrow? Saturday?
Tomorrow's relatively chill. Sunday's the crazy day for me. Udo's doing a tasting, and I'm participating in that remotely. And my daughter has a school thing. But tomorrow's pretty chill, I think. It's also pouring down rain here, which has become the new norm here.
It's snowing here, and tomorrow there's a singer-songwriter here called Karine Polwart. She's very good, but up filming her up a windswept, snow-covered hill tomorrow, and it's going to be bloody freezing, and I'm kind of not looking forward to it. It'll be fun.
Well, there's a really funny Instagram account I follow called Overheard in LA, and this sums this up perfectly because this is just the wettest winter in my lifetime in LA. And someone in a coffee shop overheard someone saying, "I am not paying California taxes to live in Oregon."
Okay.
But anyway, yeah, people are saying goodbye and thanks, and thank you guys all. Thanks so much. It was really fun.
No, thank you everybody for coming along.
And hopefully I'll see you a week from today. It's St. Patrick's Day, and I'm going to have Carrie Moynihan on, who is the producer and podcaster that I went to Ireland with back in October. And we're going to talk a little bit about her podcast. And she's adding a video component to her podcast, which is what we were doing. And she and maybe Alphonse are going to join us and share some of the clips that we shot. So thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Slange.
Cheers. Slange.